This is so valuable. This is literally life-changing information.
I went on this journey to learn about nutrition science. It took me 18 months of digging before I found the field of plant-based nutrition. And when I did, it was the most clarifying space to be in for me. It's not enough for us to know what to do. We have to be guided and cared for in the process of change.
Every time we have a snack or a meal, we have tremendous opportunity to either help or harm. I'll call it a myth because I know it's a myth that eating healthy is expensive and unaffordable.
I do believe that one can eat a plant-based diet at any price point.
Welcome, everybody. This next episode of Power to the Patient, I am delighted and honored to have one of my favorite people, actually, who I know well, Lianna Levine Reisner, who is a neighbor and, more importantly, a force in the healthcare of New York City. And interestingly, she doesn't have a medical background. She's not a doctor, but she is transforming the health and well-being of thousands of people here in New York City and beyond with her incredible organization, her will, her mission, the science behind her in having people get healthier through the power of food. The organization is Plant Powered Metro New York, and we are absolutely delighted to have you join us because I know you're going to be helping our listeners as well. So a very big welcome. Thank you, Lianna, for being here.
Thank you, Lillie. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Let's start a little bit at the beginning. This organization that you started, which again is a force here in New York City at many levels, transforming people's health. How did you personally get interested in this idea of the power of food and how it can change people's health, well-being, quality of life, and it's a life-changing topic for many people that don't get through the regular healthcare system. So tell us about how this all started for you. I don't believe I even know this.
Yeah, well, back in 2016, I was just raising my kids and trying to figure out what to feed them so we could all be healthy. And I started digging just to see what's out there in the world of nutrition. And I found myself going down lots and lots of rabbit holes because there's just so much out in the marketplace. I was motivated in part also by my own health. Initially, I just wanted to heal my acne that I had had for decades. And I put myself on a gluten-free diet previous to that, cleared up some irritable bowel issues. Then I tried gluten-free and dairy-free, and I had like a big aha because suddenly my body started to reset. And I went even further and took out other kinds of foods that were taught to me to be inflammatory. I didn't really know why. And over the course of 3 months, I saw my hormonal health change. I saw my weight slip off that I had put on during my pregnancies. And yet I didn't have any answers to what was going on in my body. I didn't understand it. So of me being who I am and wanting to know the why and wanting to have a long-term way of eating, I went on this journey to really learn about nutrition science. And it took me 18 months of digging before I found the field of plant-based nutrition. And when I did, it was the most clarifying space to be in for me because I had been so confused. And it answered a lot of the questions about what I had felt in my own body and what I could then consider eating for the long term. In my personal health journey, I had symptoms of endometriosis for over 15 years. And upon changing how I was eating, those symptoms really went away. I then saw a big change, not just in my weight, but also in my feeling of like lightness and buoyancy in my own world, feeling a lot less uptight about things on an emotional level. And later, as I further transitioned into a healthier and unprocessed way of eating plant-based foods, I found that my allergies went down. I had always had indoor allergies and I had skin issues. And I found that as I was eating more foods that were whole plant foods, the whole grains and legumes and nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables, those were the key to my wellness. But I was just one person experiencing this really wonderful benefit. And I went out to try to understand, well, if this is helping me, who else is it helping? And what is the overall experience of people with nutrition? And I was amazed because despite all the education that I had and the connection and the relationships in the community, I had no idea that you could put diabetes into remission with a plant-based diet. I had no idea that you could clear your arteries with a plant-based diet. I had no idea that you could take seemingly intractable gastrointestinal health issues and turn them around with a plant-based diet, which seems counterintuitive because if you can't digest fiber, then, how would fiber help? Well, all of these things sort of gave me this deep appreciation for what plants can do. And that was what led me into the field of plant-based nutrition as a layperson. I wanted to contribute my talents and my skills, which, coming out of the field of nonprofits and community engagement and organizational change, and always interested in community level change, and really putting all those pieces together was what led to the creation of Plant Powered Metro New York, as I met other people who wanted to co-found something that would be more significant on a regional level so we could engage a lot more people in the discussion.
Incredible. Trying to help yourself and then taking the giant leap of trying to help others. We're all trying to be healthier, I think, right? In different ways, but it can be very confusing for people. We know that, we jump to social media, we ask our friends. Sounds like there's really no consensus. And I hear this from my patients often too. And I say, sounds like there's no consensus, but if we follow the science and the evidence, it seems almost, magical, fantastical, too big, too good to be true, right? You mentioned several issues from GI problems, endometriosis, acne, skin problems, feeling heavier when you were eating differently and then feeling lighter, right? It seems like, this is the core of so many things, but how can all this be true? How can food, and specifically whole food plant-based food, which we'll get into a little bit of the weeds, all puns intended, of what is that exactly. But it seems like this touches upon, you mentioned diabetes, which is a giant chronic disease problem, which we know that we're spending all this money in healthcare dollars, and we have unfortunately poorer outcomes and just onslaught of chronic disease, which we're spending, it's not only the money, but it's the human suffering that so much is possible with just paying attention to food. And it sounds like you weren't directed by any kind of doctors or healthcare professionals, but it was just your own curiosity and your sort of knowing that you could probably do this better. And then you took a deep dive into who was doing this and what is the evidence behind this. It wasn't just some influencer. And it sounded like you were trying to have some practical ideas of what to do, and I think you, as well as millions of people, are struggling with this, currently. Yeah.
Yes. I think for me, because I wasn't finding answers in the traditional halls of medicine, I was getting inklings of ideas. I did go and seek out some alternative health practitioners who talked about anti-candida diets, or they were doing functional medicine with tons of supplements. So as I continued to refine my learning, I was able to think critically about all of the advice that I was being given, and ultimately feel that I had reached a point in my own learning and my own journey where I could separate the wheat from the chaff, right? Really understand what is the core that has a base in evidence and what's sort of the fluff of our environment around us. So, but that's not easy to do. And I think that's partially why I felt so motivated to go and share about what I learned with other people through a more formal channel, which is, we need voices of credibility in the field who can talk about this. And we need to create a sense of trust that there is a good way to eat in order to heal, because many people just sort of throw up their hands and say, well, I'm going to die anyway, so what's the whole point? But the whole point really goes back to the metrics that we have around diabetes and cardiovascular disease and just the pain and suffering that people have. We can spare ourselves all of that trauma, all of that expense, all of that lost time. And I really believe that as a society, if we treated this the way we treated, the Manhattan Project, where we just pump lots of resources and the best minds into building a nuclear bomb, if we could do the same thing with how do we make change in our food system that aligns with at the evidence base, we could be so much more well off. But in the meantime, here we are as individual people with amazing, important ideas to share with others, and we just need to get the word out. And that's why I'm grateful to you, Lillie, as a doctor who's able to bring this to your patients and also to use this platform and the many tools that are out there in the media to be able to ensure that more people learn about it.
Yeah. And likewise, my patients who I educate every single patient on the benefit of a whole food plant-based diet, as somebody who generally sees people in pain, but I'm tangentially treating things like diabetes and gut issues. Not a lot of people realize that food is really literally information for our cells. all of our cells. And every time we have a snack or a meal, we have I think of it as a tremendous opportunity to either help or harm, right? Most people are not feeling so well, as evidenced by the amount of pharmaceutical medications people take, our obesity issues, and it's not that easy to sort out. Tell us a little bit about how did you design Plant Powered Metro New York? In what way do you bring people in, or do people come to you, and how does that actually work? And is it through, education? Are there other sort of platforms and ideas? Like, you continue to build a community, which is fast growing exponentially. What are the mechanics of it? How does that work?
Thank you. Yeah. So when we started Plant Power Metro New York, we knew that there were a good number of people who already lived this lifestyle and had experienced health benefits who wanted to contribute more. So at the very beginning, we put together as many people as we could find who could be part of what we call a network. The people who are the force for good in community, who can be ambassadors, who can be educators, who can bring their particular skills and stories out into community spaces so that we can do our best engagement work. And so early on, when we first started, what was right before the pandemic, we were getting out through community centers and doing educational programs and having meals where people could try out what a whole food plant-based diet was like, catered by a restaurant or catered by some of our friends in the community who do food. And as things progressed, as the pandemic hit, we moved online. We did a lot more virtually. And now we continue to do our work mostly either through the virtual space or in partnership with really hundreds of organizations in the New York area. And what that means is we'll get together with an older adult center or with a community center or with a faith-based community or with a healthcare organization and bring our educational programming, whether it's a presentation with a dietitian or a doctor, or it's a cooking class with one of our community instructors, or having people go out to a market together and learn about produce shopping or label reading, really building the skills from the beginning of the awareness raising process through knowledge and then into action, because we didn't want to stop short and just say, here's the information, now go figure it out. We know that in community, we can do better, we can do more. So a lot of our programming is in a cohort model where we bring people together, and over time, that group supports each other in the change process. Really, the biggest program that we run is called our Jumpstart, and we run it in English and in Spanish. It's designed to help people from any dietary background to come in, learn the ropes of a whole food plant-based lifestyle, and to emerge after a month knowing what to do, knowing how to live and eat, and having core skills that an adult can always go back to later, even if life throws at you the tough stuff that will, veer us off the path. And I think that's really the key for me in all of this, which is it's not enough for us to know as adults what to do. We have to be guided and cared for in the process of change. But we also shouldn't beat ourselves up about perfection. There is a tipping point at which everybody needs to sort of go past to really experience their best health from food as medicine. But we can't sort of stop ourselves and say, this is just too much, I can't do it. Or life is really hard today. Or my mental health is low, I just don't think I can do it now. If we keep putting up our barriers, we're never going to get to that place where we feel like we've mastered a new way of being. So we're trying to help people to move past these hurdles and really treat themselves with self-care and with self-love so that we can arrive at that place and know how to do things even as we navigate through life and all of its challenges.
The community building and support piece is huge. I know this from my patients because, how am I going to do this? My husband eats differently. My friends, when I go out, right, there's a big social component to eating. So I find that in trying to get patients to really kind of stick with behavior change, right? We need support. We need community. It has to be sort of normalized. What are the biggest challenges you find with people sort of doing this, sticking with it, making sustainable change, which we know that's not debatable? I would imagine there are some headwinds that you experience. I'll say convincing, implementing, incenting. Tell us a little bit about that. People look at the friction, right? So any tips, anything that you're experiencing?
Oh, there's a lot to say. I think, first of all, just about what people know and don't know. I think that we've too long talked about healthy eating in this like very vacuous kind of way. There's just nothing there behind the idea of healthy eating. You really have to define it for people very specifically. And even the idea of just eating more fruits and vegetables, we know that's important for people's health. We know that we can reduce risk of chronic disease, but we really can't get to the space of full-on prevention and reversal of disease if we sort of take this halfway approach of eating more fruits and vegetables. There's so much more we can do to cut out animal foods, to cut out processed foods, to make sure we're eating whole grains, to make sure we're putting beans on our plate. And I think that's when people don't know the full definition of what constitutes a healthy diet. I think that's when they throw up their hands and say, whatever, it doesn't really work. So for me, I feel that it's very important that we hold out this ideal of what the optimal human diet is. Whether or not we get there to perfection, again, is not as important as knowing, because there's too much misinformation right now. But then once people know it and they worry about their own implementation capacity, that's where we go deeper, and it covers lots of bases. There are people who say, oh, but wait, my doctor told me that I shouldn't stop eating dairy products because of my bone health. And then we start to debunk myths about dairy and bone health because they don't fit together very well. There are people who live alone and have a hard time sticking with something because they don't have a partner in their home to support them, or they're living with other people whose kitchen space is being shared with them and they are still seeing the foods that call to them and they need to figure out how to separate. And in those situations, we try to help people, first of all, have resolve, to know their why. We talk a lot about purpose and motivation and get into sort of the behavior change elements of the human psyche. And of course, as you mentioned before, it's about the community. It's like if you can't get what you need in your home, you got to find friends to be in community with. And we hope to provide that to as many people as we can through the reinforcing programming that we do. And there's lots of other barriers that people put up, but those are just some of them.
I just want to step back because I'm thinking we're talking about fruits and vegetables. You mentioned dairy not optimal for bone health. We talked about staying away from animal products. Can you just give a definition of this whole food, plant-based? And when I say whole food, I always give an aside if you don't have to shop at Whole Foods, and I want to have a little conversation about access to healthy foods. What is the ideal? It's not that complicated. It's kind of simple, right? Perfection is not what we're going for. And everybody kind of like, oh, vegetarian, oh, vegan. Like people get very afraid of those words. Please, if you could spell it out, it's like roll out the red carpet of, I don't know, beets and cherries and strawberries, but go ahead.
So I think there are three big ideas, and then there's sort of the color around it. So the three big ideas are plants, not animals; whole foods, not processed, but we talk about the whole to processed food spectrum, that it's very hard to like really get fully whole foods in your diet. And so moving more along the spectrum to whole foods, foods that are how they look in nature, how you might find them. And then, of course, you can cook them, you can chop them up, you can do all sorts of things with them. But the sweet potato, the beans, the oat groats that become our rolled oats, those kinds of things, rather than the stuff that goes in a package and you have no idea that it once was part of a plant. So plant foods, whole foods. The third thing, which, it's very important for people who already have health issues in their bodies, whether it's a diagnosed disease or not. This is about low-fat eating too. We know from the science that we need to reduce our saturated fat consumption in particular, because saturated fat is going to promote poor artery health. And the arteries feed the entire body. You need that stream of blood to be moving smoothly all throughout and bringing nutrients, bringing oxygen everywhere. So when we talk about a low-fat plant-based diet, we're not talking about abstaining from sources of fat. We're talking about focusing on whole food sources of plant fat like avocados and nuts and seeds, but to be a little bit more cautious around coconut products because those are higher in saturated fat than any other plant food that we are able to eat. Keeping the dietary fat low is important for most people. And then the color around the edges is really, the importance of eating the rainbow, eating colorful foods, because the more plant foods that we eat that have reds and oranges and yellows and blues and all of that gives us a diversity of exposure to different plant compounds that will nourish us, the antioxidants or the vitamins or the minerals. And then the importance of green leafy vegetables. That's really the last thing I'll say. Even though we are not designed to be grass eaters, we are designed to be leaf eaters. And the leaves are the most nourishing element of our diet because there's just so much nutrition packed in a small amount of space. So if we can balance the starchier foods with the colorful and green foods, we really then can have the best concoction of a plant-based diet one could have, especially when we need healing toward chronic diseases. How does that sound, Lillie? Does that jive with what you teach people?
Yes, definitely a different way for me to think about it. I write down literally on my New York State prescription pad, fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, whole grains. Stay away from things egg, box, and branded. Eat things that exactly like you say, look like nature. Make sure you stay hydrated because sometimes we go for food when we are thirsty. And this is sort of, we're in the age of Ozempic and GLP-1s. A lot of people you mentioned green leafies. We have GLP-1 receptors in our bodies. If we eat like Lianna is sharing with us, we don't need to incur pharmaceuticals with side effects. Yes, gold standard, very well done. But I'm going to give some pushback on, some people will say, I don't have access. I don't live in a neighborhood where I can find these foods. Like this sounds great. And I know we personally can't fix all of that. A lot of it is policy, a lot of it is structural, not fair. And there's also I'll call it a myth, because I know it's a myth, that eating healthy is expensive and unaffordable. How do we help people work around these things?
And what I often like to say is, except for the proportion of the population that really is in the most desperate state of being, I do believe that one can eat a plant-based diet at any price point. It's just seeing how it's also played out, especially in our jumpstarts and in our Food for Life classes, it's a curriculum that was developed by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine that we use in the community. And what we find is when people are given a way of seeing the food system around them, I always talk about putting on lenses to see things differently. When we give them those lenses, suddenly we see the healthy food more. I remember when I was pregnant and I suddenly saw all the other pregnant people around me on the sidewalks of New York City, because it's just like when you notice something around you, you see it everywhere. So I believe that we actually have a lot more access than we believe. Now, we may not have access to the most appetizing fruits and vegetables. That's certainly the case in certain neighborhoods of New York City where the bodegas are just not stocking food at the freshest point. But especially with the volume that we have in our neighborhoods in New York City, there are so many places where one can go to find these healthy foods. And one of our Jumpstart participants talked about how she went to her dollar store and saw there was rice and beans on the shelf and she had never noticed it before. So there are still hurdles here. Absolutely. But the main thing, when we have measured before and after the perceptions of cost of a plant-based diet, before one learns how to do it and then after one goes through one of our cooking classes, that rating goes down because people realize, oh, it's not as high of a barrier as I thought. I can afford it.
Yeah, really well said. I'm not disagree. That's pushback I get all the time. And I have a similar response, which is, it's a pay now or pay later because you pay with your health and medical costs. And this is like basic eating from the ground. I really do see plant-based eating as actually democratizing healthcare. I like to say that so much of healthcare is actual self-care and educating yourself upstream to make the choices so you won't need the hospital visits, doctors, procedures, pharma. At any stage, at any age, we can make choices. We can make choices that's approaching dinner time tonight, right? This is literally life-changing information. There's a lot of misconceptions about food out there, right? Like social media, there's keto, there's paleo, there's physicians, carnivore, ND. There's a lot of confusing information out there, which is not necessarily supported by the evidence and the science. Eating the way we're talking about, whole foods based in plants, is also ethical for animals, and it's also our planetary responsibility. And I'm not shy about saying that. It's a very efficient way to eat. We're talking about myths. There's a lot of myth out there about that we need meat. I'm sure you have conversations with people when you share what you do, and they're like, what about?
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of myths. And I think maybe just to start it off and responsibly, I think that this idea of efficiency, just to pick that apart a little bit, we feed animals so much of the plant foods that we grow on Earth. I don't remember what the percentage is, but it's a ridiculous amount of calories that we divert to feed to animals, and then we eat those animals. And to build that efficiency, we just should go to the source and eat what the animals are eating, because we human beings are built to eat those plants. So we can really save the world so much environmental degradation and so much of this like over consumerism really that results from a process that is so inefficient. When it comes to other myths, I think a lot of it is really based on what we've heard growing up our whole lives, the idea that we should be eating meat for strength, for muscle strength. And even today, there are still so many people who are in the fitness world who are hearing messages that meat equals strength or that protein equals strength. And that's one of the biggest things that we like to get at the root of very early on, which is in most situations, if you're just eating enough calories in your diet and making sure you're eating, protein-rich beans and whole grains and leafy greens, by the way, which have protein in them as well in a nice quantity, we will get enough protein. We should not worry about that nutrient among all nutrients. And I think another myth is just about one's own self-efficacy. I'm a busy person. I'm a mother. I'm taking care of people. Or I'm taking care of an elderly parent. And I think it just goes back to, what do we need to invest in this moment in order to make sure that we can stay on this path of health for the longest amount of time? It's really just about helping you to say, yes, that's what I want all along anyway. And I'm interested in avenues that will allow me to get there. So it's just being open-minded and open-hearted and non-judgmental. Like that's what we really need to get through these myths and to recognize the strength that each of us has, because power to the patient, power to the people, like this is what life is all about. It's about finding ourselves and our voices and our power in society so that we can live the best life that we can.
100%. I think you're hitting the exact right tone, just filled with evidence-based information for people. Like you said, that's what I wanted all along. After 35 years of practicing medicine, I finally figured out, I think people just want to feel well, function well, live their lives with the least amount of side effects and not a lot of friction. I would love people to connect with your organization. I have the honor of working with you here in New York. But if there's anything, if you can just give the name again of your amazing, amazing organization and how people can connect, and anything else that you think is important that we didn't cover that could be inspiring or helpful would be great.
So the organization is Plant Powered Metro New York. You can find us online at plantpoweredmetrony.org. Also on social media, just Google it and you'll see lots of things pop up. I definitely encourage anybody who's curious, join us. We do live streams. We have a very rich YouTube channel with a lot of interviews with physicians and lifestyle change leaders. We offer our jumpstarts a few times per year and would welcome anybody to come and just give it a try. Just see what the feeling is to be putting yourself first and to understand that you are capable. You have the power and the ability to enjoy the pleasure of a plant-based diet. Maybe one last thing I'll say, Lillie, just because my daughter, she's in 9th grade, she's studying biology, and I was just quizzing her on all of the organelles in our cells, all of the little things that do the most amazing work on such a tiny level. I am just amazed at each day, like the miracle of life and how what we eat fuels all of those little tiny components that are just so perfectly working together, and that it radiates out into our ecosystems and our planet, and that what we do to nourish here really nourishes there. And I hope that may offer some inspiration for all of you to put yourselves first, and as you do, to be a partner in the Earth's healing as well.
Beautifully said. We're all like an orchestra, right? It's like a symphony. And if we can sort of bring in things that help us be vital and connected to each other, we can really create, I think, a culture of health by just keeping these conversations going. And you've done an outstanding job of educating literally thousands. I didn't even talk about how you're changing food systems in hospitals and communities. And, it's amazing, amazing work. And we're really grateful for you sharing it with our listeners. And we know you've inspired a lot of people. So thank you so much for your valuable time and all the good work you do on this earth. So
thank you.